Jeremy Vaughn returned from war expecting peace. Rachel Vaughn gave him anything but. What began as a soldier-esque quiet suspicion turned into a chilling discovery. His wife had seduced 18 men from their church while he was risking his life overseas. But when Jeremy's hidden cameras revealed the truth, the betrayals didn't end in scandal. They ended in blood. To the outside world, Jeremy and Rachel Vaughn were the ideal American couple. On weekends, the family would take bike rides through the neighborhood, attend church services, and host backyard barbecues with neighbors. Deployment came with its own burden, loneliness, emotional distance, and an unspoken tension that built up with each passing year. She kept herself busy instead church events, parent-teacher meetings, community outreach programs. Rachel became more distant, less communicative. Her once lengthy text messages to Jeremy grew shorter. The video calls became more strained. She always had a reason to cut them short: the kids, dinner, church meetings. Jeremy brushed it off at first. He trusted her. They had been married for 12 years, and there had never been a reason to question her loyalty. Late-night showers followed by her slipping into bed without a word. The pieces were adding up, but he needed proof. Rachel, oblivious, carried on with her routine. Church on Sundays, grocery shopping on Tuesdays, women's ministry on Thursday evenings. The kids went to school and came home as usual. Everything on the surface remained untouched, peaceful. Jeremy was a man of action, not assumptions. And so he devised a plan not fueled by rage, but by clarity. Not yet. Instead, he documented it all: names, dates, times. He printed stills, saved backups on encrypted drives, and created a meticulous timeline. Jeremy continued mowing the lawn, waving at the mailman, attending Sunday service with a smile. Rachel brought baked goods to potlucks and led prayer circles with unmatched grace. But behind the walls of that white-shuttered home, a storm was brewing, silent, deadly, and about to explode. Every man was catalogued like an enemy target, every movement analyzed like a mission briefing. Rachel's betrayal had shattered something inside him, but the soldier in him remained calm, strategic, and focused. Within a week, Jeremy captured the first piece of evidence: a man he vaguely recognized from church, entering their home around 11 p.m. while Jeremy was supposedly asleep in the basement. Rachel let him in without hesitation. They disappeared into the bedroom, and the camera on the nightstand recorded everything. Jeremy sat in his dark office, watching in silence, jaw clenched and hands trembling. He would find the truth no matter how much it hurt, but something gnawed at him. A soldier's instincts are rarely wrong. He knew exactly how to do it. His military training had taught him everything about surveillance, concealment, and counterintelligence. The cameras were small and hidden inside ordinary objects: smoke detectors, picture frames, even a clock in the bedroom. He told himself it was for closure, to either confirm his fears or finally put them to rest. 18 different men in total over the next few weeks, all connected to the church, all connected to Rachel. Still, the void between them grew, invisible but undeniable. The kids seemed slightly unsure around him, like they were relearning who he was. Rachel was polite but cold, as if she was walking on eggshells. There was no warmth in her eyes anymore, only routine. He tried to bridge the gap, planned a family road trip, bought her favorite flowers, helped out more around the house, but nothing seemed to change. He even suggested marriage counseling, but Rachel dismissed it with a soft, "We're just going through a rough patch." Jeremy would come home and go straight to his garage or home office, staying up late into the night, sometimes reviewing military training videos or just staring at the wall in silence. Rachel, meanwhile, stayed busy with the church. She became increasingly involved, spending hours in meetings and group sessions. She told herself she was doing God's work, but she couldn't deny the growing emptiness in her own life. When Jeremy came home, he brought a stiffness with him, a cautious way of moving through civilian life that made it difficult to fully relax. He was a good father and a loyal husband, but something in his eyes had changed. The weight of what he had seen and done overseas lived behind them. She was whispering in the kitchen, unaware that he had come downstairs for a glass of water. Her voice was low, and he couldn't make out the full conversation. But one sentence was clear: "He doesn't know anything. He's too busy playing soldier." Jeremy stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced with possibilities. Who was she talking to? What didn't he know? People admired them, Jeremy for his bravery and quiet authority, and Rachel for her nurturing spirit. They seemed inseparable, the kind of couple who made marriage look easy. The Vaughns represented everything wholesome and safe in a town where nothing much ever happened. They lived in a quiet suburb just outside Savannah, Georgia, in a cozy 2-story home with white shutters, a small garden in the front yard, and a large American flag that fluttered proudly by the porch. Jeremy was an Army sergeant, disciplined, reserved, and respected by his neighbors. He had served 3 tours in the Middle East and returned each time with a stronger sense of duty and an even deeper love for his country and family. Rachel, on the other hand, was warm, kind, and deeply religious. She was known for her soft voice, ever-present smile, and the way she made everyone feel seen and cared for. She taught Sunday school at the local church and organized charity drives with the women's ministry. Her baked goods always won prizes at community events, and she never missed a church gathering. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, both under 10, and a golden retriever named Samson. But life under the surface told a different story. Jeremy's military service meant he was often away for long stretches of time. Rachel noticed it, but she didn't speak of it. It was during one of Jeremy's longer deployments that things started to shift. When Jeremy returned from his final deployment, he felt like a stranger in his own home. It wasn't until he overheard part of a late-night phone conversation that his suspicions solidified. The next day, he began noticing things he had previously ignored. A cologne that wasn't his on her laundry. Locked drawers in her side of the closet. While Rachel was out with the kids one Saturday, Jeremy installed a series of discreet cameras around the house. For days, he watched and waited, acting normal, never letting on that anything had changed. But the footage told a different story. More men followed, different faces, all familiar. Elders from the church, deacons, even a youth pastor. Each recording chipped away at Jeremy's sanity, but he didn't confront her. In the eyes of the neighbors, the Vaughns were still the perfect couple. Jeremy didn't sleep much after the first few videos. He would lie awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of footsteps that no longer sounded innocent. His wife's betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was reality, playing out on grainy footage that made his stomach turn. Certain men came on certain days like Deacon Robert, every second Wednesday, always after the church choir rehearsal. Others, like Thomas the youth pastor, snuck in during broad daylight when the kids were at school. She wasn't hiding her body language in the footage. She was comfortable, sometimes even excited. She mentioned Jeremy by name, mocking him. "He's clueless," she said. "Still thinks I'm this perfect little wife. He wouldn't last a day without someone telling him what to do." Her tone was light, even flirtatious. It wasn't just physical betrayal, it was emotional humiliation. She encouraged him to seek therapy, told him to spend time with the kids, offered to pray with him. The performance was convincing. But Jeremy had seen too much to be fooled. Everything she said felt like poison wrapped in scripture. If something happened to him, he wanted the world to know the truth. The file contained every video, every name, every timestamp. He gave it a title, The Church List. She had allowed these men not only into their home, but into her mind and heart. The idea of revenge crept into his thoughts like a slow-moving fog. Some had minor criminal records, others were clean. But they all shared one thing. They had underestimated Jeremy. They had believed that a man so dedicated to his country would never turn on them. That was their mistake. Not out of emotion, but for precision. He wanted to track every variable. He recorded his own reactions, fears, thoughts. He wrote about the growing emptiness he felt when looking at his children, knowing they were living in a house built on deception. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since his first deployment. But the weight of betrayal made his bones ache. He told himself he hadn't made a decision, but he was already making lists. He kissed Rachel on the cheek. He stood on the porch and waved to neighbors, the perfect image of an American husband. Who had the most to lose? Who had children of their own? Who was in leadership at the church? Who had brought gifts for his wife? Who had looked him in the eye and thanked him for his service? Jeremy would pause the video on her face, looking for guilt, shame, hesitation. He never found it. Jeremy followed her not openly, but quietly, parking across the street from the church and watching. Gloves, burner phones, flashlights, tape, things he told himself were just precautions. But somewhere deep down, he knew he was preparing for something bigger than surveillance. Something that would go far beyond videos and screenshots. He saw her disappear inside, then watched as one of the men from the footage entered through the side door. He waited. 90 minutes later, they exited separately, pretending not to notice each other. Rachel smiled the whole way to her car. He attended Sunday service beside her, nodded politely at the very men who had been in his bedroom, shook hands with liars dressed as brothers in faith. His connection to the outside world faded as he became consumed with the footage. Every spare hour was spent reviewing, documenting, cross-referencing. He memorized the license plates of each man. He created psychological profiles based on their recorded behaviors. By the end, he had over 60 hours of recordings. Some men returned multiple times. One even stayed overnight. Rachel always cleaned the house afterward, lit candles, opened windows, as if she were scrubbing away guilt. He even researched their families, their positions within the church, their financial situations. Many of them had reputations to protect. That knowledge gave Jeremy power, and he knew it. Inside he was boiling, but on the surface he was calm, calculated, and watching everything. Most parked their cars a few blocks away, walking up to the house like thieves trying to avoid being seen. He began having dreams, some violent, others suffocating in their silence. In one recurring nightmare, he would walk into his bedroom and find all 18 men there, standing in a circle around his bed, laughing. Rachel stood in the center wearing white, her smile empty. He always woke up in a sweat, fists clenched, heart racing. One even wore a disguised sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but Jeremy wasn't a man ruled by impulse. Years of military service had trained him to suppress emotion in favor of strategy. What others might react to with rage, he approached with quiet calculation. The kind of calculation that had once kept him alive in war zones was now being applied to his own home. He began refining his surveillance system. Additional cameras were hidden in the garage, hallway, kitchen, and backyard. He even placed a recorder beneath the couch where Rachel sometimes sat to make her hushed late-night phone calls. Jeremy needed to understand not just who but why. Why would she betray him with not just one man, but nearly 24? And why all from the same church they both attended and served? It didn't take long before he began uncovering patterns. Jeremy created a detailed chart just like he used to do for mission briefings. Names, arrival times, durations, Rachel's behavior before and after each visit, her phone activity matched perfectly. She was sending coded messages to arrange the meetings. A Bible verse here, a flower emoji there. To outsiders it all looked like church planning or spiritual advice. But Jeremy now understood it was the language of betrayal. What shocked him most wasn't just the number of men, it was how casual she was with them. She smiled, she laughed. She poured wine, lit candles. The final blow came when he overheard her phone call to one of the men. Still, Jeremy didn't confront her. He maintained the illusion of ignorance. It was the only way to continue gathering evidence. He began isolating himself further. Rachel remained unaware. She chalked up his distance to post-deployment stress. The pressure grew heavier with each passing day. Jeremy couldn't unsee what he had witnessed. Eventually, Jeremy began documenting everything on paper. He created a file hidden, encrypted, sealed with military-grade security. But Jeremy wasn't only collecting data, he was also planning what to do next. One evening, while the kids were at a sleepover, Rachel went to a prayer meeting. The next day, Jeremy began assembling supplies. Not weapons, not yet, but gear. He started researching criminal law, what constituted entrapment, self-defense, stalking. He looked into the backgrounds of the men. Still, Jeremy was methodical. He made no sudden moves. He continued to collect footage for 3 more weeks. Jeremy began journaling each day's observations. And yet, every morning, he smiled at his children. But behind his eyes, something dark had awakened, something quiet, something patient, something with a plan. Jeremy had always believed in discipline over impulse. That belief had saved his life more than once. But as he sat alone in his garage late one night, The cold light from a single bulb casting long shadows across the room. Something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt like a betrayed husband. He felt like a soldier again, someone assigned a mission, with targets, intel, and a clear objective. In her journal, which he'd read while she was out with the kids, she had written cryptic entries about healing others and serving a higher calling. His first step was to expose the truth to someone outside the home. The moment James recognized two of the men in the video, both church elders, he turned pale and pushed the coffee cup away from his mouth. Jeremy kept his eyes on him the entire time, measuring his reaction. Not rage, not disbelief, fear, the kind of fear that only comes when a person realizes something big enough to destroy lives has just landed in their lap. They showed up at the door unannounced while Jeremy sat silently in the kitchen, listening. Rachel denied nothing. She didn't even cry. This wasn't just infidelity, it was something cult-like, twisted by scripture and shielded by community trust. The very institution they had all believed in had become a playground for betrayal. When asked why she did it, she responded with something that made Jeremy's blood run cold. Whispers followed him at the gas station, in the supermarket, even in the church parking lot. People suspected he was behind it, but no one dared say it aloud. After all, he was the victim in all this, wasn't he? The betrayed husband, the loyal soldier. What reason would he have to kill? Some people are meant to serve in ways others don't understand, she said. This was my calling. One was discovered in his garage, an old hymn playing on repeat in the background. But this time his war wasn't in a desert thousands of miles away. Reporters were asking hard questions. Who was behind this? Why were only members of the same church being targeted? He never flinched. Every detail he provided was calm and consistent. He even expressed sympathy for the victims' families. But privately, Jeremy monitored every step of the investigation. He kept a burner phone in the shed, a second encrypted hard drive with evidence, and a hidden compartment in the garage that no one knew about. Why were all the victims men with spotless public records, yet all connected to Rachel? Whoever was behind the murders was skilled, calculated, and familiar with tactics law enforcement couldn't trace easily. Jeremy watched the news each night, arms crossed, face blank. Another was found on the steps of a church in a neighboring town, his mouth filled with pages torn from a prayer book. Each murder came with strange symbols, religious items, and cryptic messages that hinted at judgment, cleansing, sacrifice. His body was posed strangely on his back, hands folded over his chest, a blood-stained Bible open across his torso. The page was marked with a single verse circled in red ink. No one shared which verse. The details were kept quiet, but the town buzzed with rumors. Not the police, not yet. Jeremy knew how easily evidence could be twisted, how powerful people in the church could shut things down before questions were asked. She stopped going to church. She grew paranoid, double-checking locks, pulling the blinds down even during the day. She asked Jeremy if he thought someone was watching them. He told her he didn't know, and that was the truth. By now, Jeremy didn't feel like the same man who had come home from deployment. That man had died the moment he saw the first video. But Jeremy didn't respond. He simply slid a second flash drive across the table and told James to do whatever he thought was right. Then he walked out. Several men didn't show up for service. Rachel was unusually quiet. Church leadership was panicking, unsure whether to make a public statement or hope the story faded, but there was no stopping it now. Jeremy had made sure of that. Instead, he contacted Associate Pastor James, one of the few people in the church leadership he hadn't found on his footage. They met at a neutral location, a diner off the highway, and Jeremy brought only a flash drive. It disgusted him. Whatever spiritual delusion she was hiding behind, it had allowed her to justify months, possibly years of deception. He wondered how long it would have continued if he hadn't discovered the truth. The pain was still there, but now it had form. Now it had direction. He stared at the stack of printed photographs spread across his workbench. Faces of men he had once trusted smiling, praying, placing their hands over their hearts during Sunday hymns. Beneath each photo, he had scrawled names, addresses, routines. Deacon Robert married, 2 kids, arrived Wednesdays at 9:45 p.m., Pastor Thomas single, kept his visits brief, parked behind the community center, and the list went on. 18 names. 18 men. Jeremy had memorized them all. Their betrayals weren't just personal, they were systematic, planned, repeated, that made them not just offenders in his eyes, but predators. He knew Rachel had convinced herself she was still doing God's work. It was time to act, not recklessly, but with precision. He didn't speak much during the meeting, he didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. James stuttered through a few weak suggestions: marriage counseling, private mediation, maybe even prayer. By Sunday morning, the news had already begun spreading through whispers. Later that evening, Rachel was confronted by 3 women from the congregation. It was in that moment Jeremy realized the damage went deeper than he'd thought. Days later, the first body turned up. Samuel Hurst, a longtime church deacon and one of the men featured prominently in the footage, was found dead in the woods outside town. Jeremy knew what people were starting to think. But the pattern didn't stop. 3 more men were found dead over the following 2 weeks. The town was in chaos. Local news media swarmed the church, the Vaughn's home, the neighborhoods of the victims. Police investigations widened. Detectives interviewed Jeremy multiple times. His alibis were solid, his tone controlled. The deeper the police dug, the more confusing things became. No fingerprints, no security footage, no witnesses. Rachel, once full of self-righteousness, began to unravel. Now the soldier had returned. It was right here, in his house, in his church. And the mission had only just begun. The town of Maple Ridge had never experienced a true scandal before. It was the kind of place people moved to for safety, for quiet streets and Sunday potlucks, where the loudest sound on a Saturday morning was a lawnmower. But now it had become a name whispered on national news broadcasts, with reporters using phrases like church sex ring and vigilante killer. The faces of the murdered men began appearing on television screens across the country, each profile accompanied by respectful nods to their community involvement and tragic endings. But none of the anchors could ignore the link: they had all been members of the same church, all connected to the same woman, and all now dead. Whatever bond they once shared had been severed completely. He no longer felt love or even anger. Police re-examined everyone linked to the victims, including Jeremy. But his military background, his public composure, and the fact that he had cooperated from the start gave him a shield of credibility. He was still seen, at least by outsiders, as the man who had been betrayed, not the one possibly doing the killing. He provided them with partial footage, carefully edited clips showing the infidelity, but omitting the extent of his surveillance or the number of men involved. She moved to the guest room without explanation. He didn't stop her. They hadn't spoken more than a few sentences in days. So were a few clothes? He checked the guest room closet and found an empty space where her suitcase had been. For the first time in weeks, his hands trembled. He checked the footage. She had left around 11:30 p.m., climbed into a car that wasn't hers, and driven off. The license plate was blurred, the camera lens sprayed with something oily. When she passed him in the hallway, her eyes flicked downward, never meeting his. They searched the woods, the nearby lakes, even reopened unsolved cases in surrounding counties. They brought in forensic psychologists to build a profile of the killer. She claimed Jeremy confessed to her in a moment of rage. For the first time since it all began, he felt something approaching peace. Not because it was over, but because everything that could be broken had already shattered. There was nothing left to protect, only the truth he carried alone. But with no recording, no witnesses, it was her word against his. And she was already viewed as unstable, embroiled in the scandal, morally compromised. The profile matched Jeremy in too many ways: military background, emotionally detached, methodical, likely driven by betrayal. The guilt was finally setting in, but it was too late for apologies. Detective Linwood stepped out of the unmarked car and informed Jeremy that Rachel had turned herself in. But inside he felt something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger, disappointment. She had finally broken. Not for the murders, but for knowledge of them. She claimed she knew who the killer was. Claimed she had evidence. Jeremy had moved past forgiveness. What had started as heartbreak had transformed into a mission of control, retribution, and cold order. He told them he had installed the cameras for home security, concerned for his family while he was away. They combed through his garage, his computer, his shed. They found nothing. All the files had been erased, backups destroyed. Every hard drive had been removed or wiped. Jeremy had planned for this. He had buried anything incriminating where no one would ever find it. It was plausible, believable, and no one wanted to accuse a soldier without hard evidence, only a strange numbness. The kind of quiet that follows the last bullet in a firefight. A silence that wasn't peace, but something close to the end of it. He kept detailed logs of every development in the investigation. He monitored police radio chatter using a scanner hidden in his garage. He tracked every surviving member of the original 18 on a digital map, color-coded according to risk. Some had fled town entirely, others had hired security. A few attempted to return to normal life, attending church with strained smiles, pretending nothing had happened. By the time the sixth body was discovered, fear had replaced faith in Maple Ridge. Sermons turned into vague apologies wrapped in scripture, with the lead pastor looking more like a politician than a man of God. Protesters began appearing at the gates. News vans camped outside during Sunday services. The sanctuary, once a place of worship, now felt like a crime scene with stained glass windows. The man, James Walters, a youth group coordinator, was found in the trunk of his own car, parked behind a strip mall. One in particular, Detective Mara Linwood, began paying closer attention to Jeremy. She requested multiple interviews and dug into his deployment records, trying to understand the man beneath the uniform. Jeremy remained calm under pressure, answering every question with precision. His stories never changed. His tone was always even. If he was lying, he was doing it with the discipline of a trained operative. His wrists were bound in prayer position. A note had been taped to his chest with a single sentence, "Let judgment begin in the house of God." The coroner revealed he had been strangled, then carefully arranged post-mortem. There was no sign of struggle, no trace of the killer. Police called in FBI assistance. A profiler was assigned to the case. The media speculated endlessly. Some believed a deranged outsider was targeting the church. Others hinted at a grieving husband seeking his own form of justice. A few conspiracy theorists online even suggested it was an inside job, someone from within the church hierarchy trying to clean up a decades-old secret. Rachel Vaughn, at the center of it all, had become a ghost in her own home. She no longer left the house except to drop off the children. Her phone was turned off most days. She refused to speak to reporters. Church leaders had asked her to step down from the women's ministry, citing the need for healing and reflection. Behind closed doors, she paced constantly, her movements jerky and nervous. She double-bolted the doors at night, drew every curtain, and jumped at every creak of the floorboards. Jeremy watched her unravel with clinical detachment. He had nothing more to say to her. The investigation intensified. Still, detectives weren't convinced. But behind the scenes, Jeremy's world was becoming even more methodical. The church itself had become a shell. Attendance dropped by half. Donations dried up. Rachel stopped sleeping in the same room with Jeremy. Then, one night, something changed. Jeremy came home from a late drive and found Rachel gone. Her purse, phone, and keys were missing. She had covered her tracks. Hours passed with no sign of her. The next morning, the police arrived. Jeremy didn't blink. He didn't ask questions. 2 days later, detectives returned with a search warrant. But Rachel's testimony raised new suspicions. Investigators began focusing harder. Still, no one could prove it. Rachel, after weeks of interviews, was placed under protective supervision. Her accusations, though serious, lacked hard evidence. Jeremy returned home that night and sat in silence. The kids were staying with his sister. The house was still, and as long as no one could prove anything, it was his to keep. Jeremy stood in the kitchen long after the sun had set, staring at the darkened window as if it might reveal what lay ahead. The house, once filled with the noise of children, clinking dishes, and quiet hymns playing from Rachel's phone, now echoed with emptiness. Her testimony was too thin, lacking any physical proof. The community that once held him in high regard now whispered behind closed doors. The church had released a carefully worded statement about healing, redemption. He didn't respond to media requests. He didn't write a statement. He said nothing. To those watching him, he was either a man broken by betrayal or a mastermind hiding in plain sight. Jeremy didn't care which one they believed. What mattered was control, and control he still had, and the need for accountability. Attendance dropped to almost nothing. The pastor took an indefinite leave of absence. Several surviving members of the exposed group resigned from their roles, vanished from town, or sold their homes. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "You forgot something." Maple Ridge was no longer what it once was. The town had been cracked open like a rotten egg, and the stench had settled over everything. But it was enough to raise questions. Why was he preparing burner phones and gloves? Why the hidden tools? The timestamp matched the week of the first murder. She read him his rights, then slid the flash drive across the table. Jeremy glanced at it, said nothing. Right now it's circumstantial. But that's going to change. What played was a video grainy, clearly from one of the hidden cameras he thought he had destroyed. The planning, the surveillance, the timing. But this angle was different. It showed him, not Rachel, not the men, but Jeremy himself. He was seen opening a locked case, handling gloves, arranging something on a table. "She was scared of you." And she had reason to be. This time they found the trigger. Not a weapon, but receipts? To some he was a monster, cold, calculated, remorseless. To others, a tragic hero pushed too far. The footage of the murdered men was shown in court. The prosecution connected patterns between Jeremy's military training and the methods used in the killings. The jury watched the garage video. They saw the diagrams. The town slowly returned to normal, though the wounds never fully healed. The children were placed in the care of Jeremy's sister. They would grow up knowing only pieces of the story. People still locked their doors earlier, looked twice at their neighbors, avoided certain streets. They heard Rachel's recorded statements. They reviewed the purchase logs, the anonymous tips, the burner phone pings. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. His silence wasn't out of defiance, it was part of the plan. He had accepted long ago that this might end in a cell. That didn't bother him. What mattered to him was the mission. And the mission, in his mind, was complete. Not out of guilt, but something more complex: grief, confusion, perhaps even fear. She had exposed him, but she hadn't destroyed him. Jeremy had done what he set out to do. And now, even behind bars, he remained composed, in control. Jeremy had paid cash for nearly everything, but one overlooked item, a prepaid phone charger, had been bought with a debit card linked to a military retirement account. That charger was the same brand used to power the phone found next to the body of Samuel Hurst. The camera, cleverly placed behind an old bookshelf in the garage, had survived unnoticed. Somehow, Rachel or someone else had retrieved it before the final sweep. Children no longer played outside his house. The front yard flowers Rachel once planted wilted and turned brown. No one came to water them. Life without parole. No appeal, no deals. He didn't speak, didn't resist. He looked straight ahead as he was led down the driveway, past neighbors peeking through their curtains, past the reporters shouting questions he would never answer. He was placed in the back of a squad car and taken to the station. She had only suspicion and fear, two things that didn't hold up in court. Police returned to Jeremy's home multiple times, combing through his belongings, questioning him again and again. But Jeremy had erased everything long before Rachel cracked. No files, no footage, no blueprints, no tools. Just a quiet man with nothing but his word and no reason to confess. Dust had settled on the family photo frames lining the hallway. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. But Jeremy didn't flinch from it. He had grown used to silence in the desert, in dark barracks and bunkers where the only sound was the ticking of his watch before the next mission. Silence, for him, was normal. The investigation had stalled. Rachel's accusations had sparked movement but failed to deliver results. Despite the absence of evidence, Jeremy was watched constantly. Plainclothes officers parked across the street. Drones flew overhead. Neighbors stopped waving. Rachel remained under police supervision, isolated in a safe house out of state. Jeremy had no intention of running. He woke up each day at 5 a.m., worked out, maintained the house, and stayed off the internet. But there was one variable he hadn't anticipated. A small package arrived one morning, no return address, just his name in shaky handwriting. He stared at it for a long time before inserting it into his laptop. It wasn't a smoking gun. There was no violence in the footage. Jeremy sat frozen. It was a miscalculation, his only one. And it might be enough. That evening, police knocked again. Search warrant in hand. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough for an arrest. Jeremy was calm when they placed the cuffs on him. In the interrogation room, Detective Linwood sat across from him. "We're building a case," she told him. Still, Jeremy said nothing. "We know what happened, Jeremy. Maybe not every detail, but we know." Jeremy leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "We also know Rachel didn't lie," Linwood added. But Jeremy wasn't afraid of their conclusions. Over the course of a trial that gripped national headlines, Jeremy's name became a symbol. Jeremy never testified. He never apologized. When the verdict came guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder, he showed no emotion. Rachel, seated quietly in the back of the courtroom, sobbed silently. The church was disbanded months later. The building was sold, the steeple removed. It became a storage facility. Rachel changed her name and moved far away, and Jeremy... He sat in a prison cell, his posture straight, eyes clear, a man without regret. The cameras had caught everything, except the moment he stopped being a husband and became something else entirely.